Your mic, Darrion. Your mic's muted.
Yeah, I just muted for I had a cough. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, no problem. I just want to make sure you knew. 3, 2, 1. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're at in the U.S. or somewhere around the world. Welcome. Thanks for joining us on the show this evening. We have another awesome show for you. Got some great guests that have been on Baseball Outside the Box before. But let me tell you, before you start, let's do this. Go to Facebook. If you're on Facebook, you have any questions, it's live on Facebook. Just type them in the comments section. Also, YouTube. We'll be on YouTube. Check it out, Peter Caliendo. And the audio will go on baseballoutsidethebox.com. Do us a favor, just subscribe. And then if you can, spread the word on social media about the shows. We really appreciate it. I got to tell you, 3 good things. And I want to thank all our fans in the U.S. and around the world. 1, we've reached over 200 shows just on the podcast. On YouTube, over 100. And we've got 100 countries, listeners from over 100 countries. That's a big deal for us, and that's because of all of you. So I want to thank you. And I've told you Happy New Year probably a couple times since New Year's, but I'll say it again. Happy New Year, everybody. Hope you're safe, and let's rock and roll. Today's show, we're going to talk about the Caliendo Sports International Japan trip, because I want to tell you what a trip it is, and also how much you can learn by going on the trip. All of us have learned from the Japanese baseball so much. Some of us have a lot of experience in it, and we're going to talk about that. So we'll talk about the trip, and then we'll delve into practice organization, about as far as dealing in how to utilize your time and the best way to organize a practice. So that way the results are better when it comes to the actual game. So you're getting something out of it. You're not just practicing just to practice. I think we got 2 great coaches on staff. Today, we're going to talk to Coach Siler and Coach Gurney. And they've also been Caliendo sports coaches for a long time. They've been all over the world. I want to thank them. So, guys, let me start with Coach Siler. Thanks, man, for being on the show, as always.
Yeah, thanks. Happy New Year, Pete. Appreciate you having me on again.
Happy New Year. And Coach Gurney, you too, man. How you been?
Great. Thanks for having me, Pete. Looking forward to doing a little hot stove baseball chat here.
Absolutely. Always fun. And I'm always learning, folks, and they know that I always say, you guys are a lot younger than I am, and I think baseball is in a positive direction, because we have a lot of young coaches who are opening up the minds of a lot of coaches all over the world, and understanding that, there's so many ways to skin a cat, I guess. And you're learning how to, do that. And we're learning from a lot of young people that are pretty bright in a lot of ways. And you guys are 2 of them. And we got a lot of them in the U.S. and around the world. So I want to thank you guys for what you do in helping baseball. Hey, let's do this. Before we get into Caliendo Sports International, Coach Siler, just give a little background on what you've been doing with your team. Maybe something that, can help other coaches, because we're still stuck, obviously, at home in a lot of areas and a lot of country. We may be in home, all over the country, actually. So maybe what you've been doing that can help some coaches.
Sure. Yeah. So, obviously it's a pretty difficult time to get large groups of people together. And if you're in the mid-Atlantic or the Northeast or somewhere where it's cold, getting outside becomes a little bit more difficult as well. So we've had to adapt and try to figure out creative ways for our guys to continue to grow as athletes and young men. Some of the things that we've been doing in the time that it would normally be our off season, where we're working on skills or changing a little bit of mechanics and going to indoor practices. Instead of doing most of those traditional things, we've gone to a kind of an online model where on the one hand, we have chalk talks, and we're talking about either strategy or team culture, or we're talking about expectations and standards, or we're breaking down video, looking at different players, whether it's their hitting or their throwing, and then trying to educate all of our guys on what it is that they want to be looking for when they're breaking down their own video, and trying to give them a sense of what's going to help them to get better. Prescribe them a couple of different drills and say, hey, this is why we might want to do that particular drill. Whether it's, hey, we got to get better at hinging when we leg lift in our delivery, and so in between throws, let's do a couple of single leg squats with a weight out front that you press, do 3 to 6 of those, and then go back and throw into a net or whatever it is. So we'll give them some prescriptive drills. We'll talk about culture. We'll talk about base running. And we've been using a platform called GameSense. I know you've had, I think, Dr. Faddy on here before.
Mhm.
But we've really bought into Game Sense as a platform that's going to help us. You're always looking for ways to couple perception and action. So that platform is great if you want to use it just as a standalone or to have it as a hit station. And we've tried to give our guys ways to get creative in setting up hit stations where they're projecting or using a large screen or even just their computer screen. Obviously, if they're using their computer screens in front of them, they're not hitting anything off a tee, but you can project into a white sheet and then have your tee set up, and you can pretend like you're getting reps off of a live pitcher based off of go or no go or a certain pitch type or certain location. So, we're trying to give them ways in order to get sort of game-like reps in their bedroom or in their basement from home. So these are sort of like simulated live at-bats that otherwise they normally wouldn't be getting. Better than just hitting off of a tee, better than just sitting at a desk clicking on ball or strike, although that's helpful as well. But we want to make sure that there's, far transfer, not just getting better at game sense, but getting better at hitting a live pitch. So, those are just some of the things that we've been trying to do. Also, talking to them about the recruiting process, we've really been trying to get them to, look inwardly about what is it that they want to do, how far do they want to go in the game, what kinds of schools they want to go to, giving them different sheets to fill out, and encouraging them to have conversations with their parents, having seminars and webinars about that process with parents as well, and not just the kids. So, making up tests. I know Coach Gurney, I've used a bunch of your stuff on, testing them about the game. So I've definitely used some of your stuff on that. So, those are just some of the things we've been doing. I'm sure Coach Gurney's got a bunch of stuff that you guys have been doing.
Yeah, before we get into, I want the listeners to know, and because we got so many listeners in different countries and in the U.S., want them to know, both of these guys, we're talking about high school coaching. Coach Gurney's in college. They've got academies. If you've got a youngster who's anywhere in the world, I would definitely send your players to any one of these guys, whether it be high school or college, to play for them. And it's not easy because, there's a lot of competition, obviously, but we're going to have all that in the show notes in case you want to reach them. Coach Gurney, I kind of like, in some ways, I know we've been in the house too long. I mean, it's enough's enough, and hopefully things will change soon. But at the same time, boy, we're getting pretty creative at how we do things. And it's really opening up the minds a little bit because we have to, right? We got to figure out, well, what are we going to do here to keep our kids motivated? Because one thing we don't want to do, especially as you know, with your academy at the real young levels, and I had several people email me about this. They said, my kid's 11 years old. He's 12 years old. He hasn't played for a year. He's losing interest. We could possibly lose a lot of kids if we don't get these kids going somehow, like you guys are doing, whether it be on Zoom or however we can do this. So tell us what you've been up to and what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And I think you heard at the high school level, Coach Siler does a very comprehensive job, almost like a college program, what he's running down there with the Patriots at John Carroll. So we've personalized it more than ever because we're in smaller groups. So number one, there's a lot more video analysis where someone will send me, whether it be a pitcher or a hitter, them hitting in a much smaller environment. And we can do a lot of feedback and compare them to some major league hitters and see where they're at mechanically. A lot of the physical fitness they can do, COVID's not going to shut them down from getting after it with weights or fitness and so forth. And then some of the visual stuff that Darren mentioned, we've definitely advanced in that regard. Now, if I leave the college level for a moment and talk about a lot of the training that my younger guys do, I think you bring up a great point. Are we going to lose players during this downtime? The only thing I'll say is a lot of other sports are shut down. As a matter of fact, baseball is a more friendly COVID sport than, say, soccer or football or any indoor sport like basketball and so forth. And, even swimming has been shut down by me recently. So baseball, you can still kind of space out and get a lot done. And over the summer around here, Pete, my son's 13. He played a 50-game schedule from July 6th through October 20th or whatever it was. So there are sports that are being harder hit than baseball. But I think you're right. We have to be cognizant of the fact that a lot of parents and a lot of players are kind of on the fence about what am I going to do now? I'm out of it. I'm rusty. Baseball is such a skill-based sport, unlike, let's just say, track or swimming, where if you lose your skills in baseball, it's much more crucial than something like running, where it's just more an athleticism thing and you got to at most build up your endurance. So I think a lot of the sports are trying to figure this out, Pete. And hopefully, we'll be back in action by, late spring, summertime.
Hey guys, I'm gonna flip the script on you because we had a little talk prior to this, 10 minutes before, and I mentioned, we'll talk about Caliendo Sports International, the Japan trip. But I'm gonna flip it a little bit because I think we're on a conversation here that we need to continue into and delve in this a little bit. And I'll tell you why, because I've had several conversations with coaches about this. We all come from a background, and you guys especially, being teachers, educators, you're very organized. You study all the time. Obviously, it's your education too. It's your background. But when we talk about being indoors right now, one of the things I was thinking about, and I wonder why more guys don't do this, and it's because I think at the younger levels, kids need to be more game oriented, more understanding the game more, playing the game a little bit on their own. I've said this before on the show, get them young to play the game on their own, think on their own a little bit, make some mistakes. I'm not saying you just turn everything over to them. And I thought one of the things that could be done, I think Coach Gurney and I might have talked about it on the last show, was, when you're on Zoom with your young kids, they don't want to hear somebody talk only, obviously. And I know you guys know this. They want to see things, right? I mean, if you're talking to me, I want to see some videos. I want to see some action. But at the same time, I could be watching a major league game with them because there's plenty of tape games, and maybe at the same time stopping the game and asking them questions about a certain situation that just happened before it actually happens, maybe. And to see how they react and what they would do in that situation. Today, I talked about a situation with a coach about a pickoff play. Pickoff play happens. What do you do as a runner? One of the responses the coach mentioned to me, he said, well, a lot of times you're either trying to get the guy after releases the ball to run into you, or possibly sometimes you might drop down to the ground, because it's harder to tag you when you do that. But at the same time, you got to train for that. And all I just said, and either one of you could take this, where do you start when it comes to organizing a successful practice? Okay. Does it start in the classroom with video and doing certain things there, then go onto the field to do it? And what's maybe the better system, some tips on how to handle this? Coach Siler, I don't know, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So, I mean, that's a really great question. And I think there are a lot of different ways, like you said, I think we talked about earlier, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to go about it. And Coach Gurney mentioned something about baseball being such a skill specific sport. And that's why skill acquisition and trying to create an environment that is loud and has a lot of information for the athlete to explore, to fail, and to grow is really important. So when we talk about practice organization, I think you have to have a certain fundamental base level, which is where I think maybe the classroom environment is important to kind of give some demonstrative examples of situations. But then you have to let them go out into practice, and your environment has to sort of scream at them with, here's solution space, go find it, right? So, I typically am not explaining to them, here is exactly how our bunt coverage is going to go. We'll put people in situations, and then we'll say, okay, you have to, within the next two batters, we'll have small little scrimmages or something, and we'll put certain situations for certain reps and say, okay, in the next two batters, next three batters, somebody has to bunt. So we're giving them autonomy. We're allowing them to kind of shape how they want to attack their offensive strategy in small groups. They're thinking the game, they're working collaboratively, and then they're experimenting to see if they can execute what they're trying to do. And after they perform that task, I think there's a great opportunity for us to have a discussion about what worked, what didn't, what we might want to try differently next time. And then, the next large circle around, or the next practice, or the next week, whenever we revisit those kinds of things, we see what has transferred into sort of their baseball lexicon or IQ. So I think it's important for them to have it's like you want to have a fundamental base and understanding, and then you want to introduce competition and an environment that allows them to explore, and really importantly, not to consider failure as a bad thing, especially at practice. But instead of saying, baseball is a game of failure, we like to say that baseball is a game of opportunity. So these practices, feel free to fail, fall flat on your face. It's okay. We're not going to yell and scream at you. It's
Let me
a
ask-
learning opportunity.
Let me ask, and Coach Gurney, jump in here. I want to ask this also, since you said that. The part I was thinking about was, when I grew up, it was different. That's why I think things are changing for the better in some ways. When I grew up, it was pretty much, here's the bunt situation. We're going to create it for you. We're going to show you exactly what you do. First baseman does this, second, short, third, the catcher, blah, 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 and then we're going to do it. And, I agree with you. I like the part where they kind of figure it out on their own. Coach Gurney, what do you think?
I think the more you can simulate a game situation, the better they're going to perform when that game comes along. So number one, I love competition in practice, and sometimes I give prizes and awards. That could be a t-shirt, that could be food, Gatorades, whatever it might be. I do think it's important that it's very organized and high energy, so there's not a lot of downtime. No different than a classroom setting, as Coach Siler will tell you as a social studies teacher. If the players sense that you're not organized and prepared and have everything mapped out, you're going to lose that energy and that focus. So number one, I think you got to be organized. Number two, it's good to add diversity. So maybe one day you email them the practice plan the night before. Another day they show up and it's posted, color coded on the bulletin board or wherever you post things. Another day you have the captains design the practice and they put out their favorite drills. But within all of those practices, I think there's got to be a certain urgency to get to the next station or the next drill or the next competition. And there's got to be a real speed to it. So that, and at my level with college, we might only have the gym for an hour and 45 minutes one day because girls softball's coming in and volleyball just got out. So I want it to be high energy. I don't know if you remember Nolan Richardson at Arkansas. He had these intense 90-minute practices with his basketball team. And it was all about simulating the intensity of a game. Because a lot of these college programs, they would practice 3-4 hours. They want to go over every possible thing. Yeah. And Nolan Richardson said, no, we're just going to have the same intensity of a game at our practices. And I think you can do that with baseball. Baseball, there's a lot of standing around if you don't orchestrate it and really engineer it differently. And I do everything in my power to avoid standing around.
The other area I want to discuss also, and I think this is very interesting, every one of your players, as we've been told by many people, that learn differently. And I said it earlier, I've got to see it and I've got to do it. You show it to me on video, you show it to me on a chalkboard, I'm gone. I'm lost. But if I actually do it, it's similar to, giving signs. I remember first time in pro ball, I had to give signs at third base, right? Well, the coach, our manager gave us a sign and I knew what the signs were, but I had to practice it before I could even do it. If I didn't do it, there's no way I'm going to be able to handle it. So let's talk about that. How do you deal, Coach Siler, individually? How do we deal individually with players?
You want to try to individualize your plans and your trainings for the players as much as possible. But I know that there are also oftentimes constraints for coaches, and there may be only one coach for the entire team, and so it's really hard to try and be as hyper individualized as you want to be. Yeah, but yeah. So strategy that we use at John Carroll is we like to, especially with, let's take hitting groups for example, we'll divide them up into similar sort of types of hitters. Hey, this guy's got a big engine, this group of guys has a big engine, but not very much good, not good barrel awareness, or this group's got great barrel awareness, but we need to get that engine going a little bit. this guy's kind of a mix of everything. And so we group them up into similar types of movements. And then we'll give those groups when we're, we like to do rotating, everybody does this, I'm sure, but you like to rotate groups to different stations. And so those groups will have different drills. Big motor guys will have different drills than barrel awareness guys. So we're trying to individualize for that group as much as possible, and give them drills that are going to help them, get better at certain things and reinforce certain things they're already good at. I think it goes back to what Coach Gurney was saying, is including the intensity and the energy. And, again, it goes back to creating that loud environment where they're getting to experiment and explore lots of different things, and it's high energy and it's high in intensity, and they're figuring it out for themselves, more than me kind of, cracking their head open and filling baseball knowledge in there. Right.
Coach Gurney, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Coach Siler just mentioned the loud environment. Something that I would do in a college setup is we're throwing indoors, and it's our 5th week, and we're throwing off indoor mounds. And now we have a competition to see who can throw strikes with the whole team cheering and jeering the pitcher who's on the mound. So that's creating, if you will, a hostile atmosphere where the player has to perform. Or you'll have a kid hitting in the batting cage. And if he can hit 3 line drives in a row, the team is lined up incidentally on the line, on the baseline. If he hits 3 in a row, they don't have to run. If he doesn't execute a squeeze bunt or move them over, they all have to run, a sprint back and forth. So you're creating a raucous environment. Back to your question about different learning styles. Right, we all know there's different types of learners. Some people learn by reading and writing. Some learn kinesthetically by physically doing something. Some people are more visual. I think you have to be mindful of that as a coach, although in a team setting, it can be hard to individualize everything. So one thing I'll do is I'll put my pitchers who have the same body type in a group, and they can communicate with each other. Oh, you have long limbs, and you have to manage that. Or maybe you're a short guy and you've always done a lot of dip and drive. Hey, how have you handled this or that scenario? So I'll do body types, but I also think, let's face it, some guys stay more focused than others. So I'll often pair up a guy who's a little bit more serious and intellectual with that guy who's more the free thinking kind of, I learn and do it on the spot. So I like to pair sometimes opposites together. And I sometimes feel like they learn a lot in that kind of situation, learning from a more intellectual, intuitive player versus that field player who just reacts athletically.
I want to delve into this part too, because, you mentioned intensity earlier. And I'll start with Coach Gurney on this because you brought it up. The intensity, when we're talking about intensity with a drill or intensity as a group drill, meaning a game situation possibly. I guess the question is, how do we know when to intensify it, to what level, and when we need to bring it back because they're not ready for that?
I think a lot of that is, where are you in your season? Is it January? Is it February before opening day? Is it March before your first conference game? I think peaking is very important as a coach, winding back. Okay, playoffs start, and maybe for a high school coach, playoffs start May 20th. For a college coach, it might be, 3 weeks or a month before that. So if we want to peak at that point, we've got to think about intensity. We've got to think about days off leading up to that. We've got to think even about our physical conditioning and our workouts leading up to that. So I think the athletic pyramid is also part of it, not just the high energy and emotions of a practice. And I always tell my guys, baseball is not football. It doesn't have the same emotion. And if you want to discuss a player, you watch Mike Piazza, the way he would walk into the batter's box. I know you're an Italian American baseball freak, Pete.
Yeah,
Mike Piazza's, arguably one of the greatest Italian baseball players ever. And his motor, he was very mellow. And for those of you football fans out there still watching football, Aaron Rodgers, right? When he takes the snap, he's almost very mellow, and he's in this 34-31 football game, playoff game, and you would think he was at the movie theater. So I think it's important to teach intensity more than just say, yeah, we're going to be going after it today. Let's bring the energy. I think you have to actually discuss when you want to get fired up and when you want to be kind of low key. And sometimes the more stressful situation, the more low key you want to be. And I'd love to hear from Coach Siler about this as a former professional pitcher in terms of how he would kind of wire himself in those situations.
I think it comes down to the individual because, like you're saying, you have guys that are very low key and it looks like you're going to the movie theater when you're in a big moment. So, I think it's about self-reflection and encouraging that self-exploration in your athletes. Some guys may want to meditate for 10 minutes before a game. Other guys may want to listen to death metal and get really fired up. Right. So you have to encourage them to seek out what works for them in order to, find what their motor is and what's going to be the best way for them to get into those highly competitive states of mind. It really is about them being able to explore on their own what works for them. And I think as well, I wanted to talk about, because when you first mentioned intensity of practice, I equated it to difficulty of what you're asking them to do, not necessarily in terms of, bringing the energy. In a lot of ways, I sort of expect my athletes when they show up to practice to have that's the standard, is you have to bring good energy to practice. So if I have to teach that, and it doesn't mean you have to be rah-rah, but it means you have to be engaged, right? And if I have to teach that, then there's probably an issue or a problem there, right? So, but getting back to intensity as difficulty of practice or practice design, those kinds of things, I think it's really important to note, when, like Coach Gurney, when is it that you're trying to do certain things? So the fall is going to be very different than the winter, is going to be very different than the spring. So, in some cases you want to have high growth, low performance, where you're really challenging the athlete. You're really trying to challenge them to change certain things about their mechanics. You're giving them lots of variability, whether it's in hitting different weights of plyos with different lengths of bat, and trying to really challenge them with variability. Versus as you get closer to the season, you want to get further away from that, the high growth, low performance into high performance, high pressure, where you're adding some of that game-like simulation. And then when you get in season, it's less about trying to change things or rework things or add difficulty and more failure in practice. And I think it's more about trying to get them to be high performance, low pressure, and those kinds of things. So it really depends. It's you have to balance all three of those things in different proportions throughout the year. So you're still going to add elements of high growth, low performance during the season. You're going to challenge them and add variability, but you're not going to have as much of your practice dedicated to those kinds of drills or situations as you would in the fall, let's say. So I think that's important to think about as well as you're doing your practice design.
I love this conversation. I think we're really onto something here, something good that can really help coaches. This morning I was walking my dog, 25-degree weather, was having a lot of fun walking him. And Coach Ayers, a Hall of Fame coach here in Chicago, called me up. We're on a conversation. Before I knew it was like an hour talk, because I'm walking my dog for an hour and we're talking baseball. One of the topics we got on was this, and that's because I started a series on organizing, understanding how to organize successful practices and getting them to transfer into games. That's something we said earlier. And one of the things that came up is, and one of you guys mentioned, I can't remember who mentioned this, we gotta deal with failure, right? There's going to be failure in practice. The more you fail, and I think, Coach Siler, you mentioned something about, let them understand that it's okay to fail. At the same time, they also have to know how to transfer that understanding into a game situation. So when they fail, because even though practice goes great and they're going well, they're still going to fail in a game, maybe a lower percentage. So how do we practice? What are situations we can practice in practice when we fail? What do we do? How do we get them do we just say, just forget it, don't worry about it, that's part of the game? But there's got to be more to it than that. I mean, we're talking about almost being a sports psychiatrist here or psychologist. I mean, combining the psychology part with the practice organization sounds like a key factor. And that's what I want to get into. I want to pick your brains on this.
Yeah,
Siler?
I was gonna mention, Pete,
Go ahead.
confidence. Baseball players of all ages, confidence is so important. And what Darren was just previously speaking about is the fact that if we do very challenging things at practice, let's just say hypothetically, you set up a pitching machine to throw 86-mile-an-hour sliders, the hitters are going to struggle, but it's good for them to see it. So when it happens in a playoff game, they're experienced with it. Having said that, if they do so much of that and they make contact firmly only 10% of the time, they're not going to feel good about themselves, and their confidence level is going to be really low, and they're going to go into a game feeling like, geez, I'm not a good hitter. But by the same token, you want to just give them front toss all day where you're flipping underhand balls to them and they're hitting seeds to the back of the cage. So there has to be a combination there, Pete. And although we want our players to feel confident upon going into competition, there has to be that growth, and they're not going to grow and want to make adjustments, I would add, unless there's that failure. So if you see a kid who's got a problem with his hitting mechanics, let's say, you want to exploit and expose him at practice so then he's willing to make an adjustment. And then hopefully once he makes that adjustment, you've built his confidence up. And again, it comes back to me about peaking and timing of when you have these activities occurring, whether it be March, April, May, depending on your conference schedule and so forth.
Coach Siler?
Yeah, and I think you also have to know your athletes as individuals. I mean, not every team has 25, high school level for me, 25 of the same mentalities. So I think the real art of coaching is doing your best to try and get to know each one of those players and what fires them up or gets them inspired or helps them to grow. Some guys may need a little bit more of a, it's kind of like this stern conversation from you. Some guys may need just more encouragement. I think really what you want to encourage in them, right? That's your job as the coach, is try to help find them ways to deal with that failure. But for them, they have a job to do in that as well, right? They have to look within themselves, and they have to be able to ask themselves, if I fail, how do I deal with this? And there are ways for me to cope with that failure, as well as the success. Because if you think as a baseball player, when I get a hit, I'm really good, and if I strike out, I'm really bad, you're on a roller coaster that you're not going to really have long-term success, and you're focusing on the wrong things. So trying to help direct them to focus on things that are within their control and celebrating those things are probably more important than celebrating the success of the result. So, encouraging them to do meditation and to have, if they're in a situation, if I'm a pitcher and I miss my spot, well, I want to try to do, something physical, a deep breath, or maybe it's wipe off the mound with the rubber with my foot, just something physical to snap them out of that rep and then get focused on the next one in the present moment. So you have to have a short memory, and then there are, like tricks and things that we can do as coaches to help give them the tools to be able to overcome that adversity and understand that you have to just be able to let go and move on to the next one. That failure is temporary, and so is success. And what you got to focus on is right now. So let's focus on what right now is. Let's focus on what's within our control right now. Like everything I do, from when I pick up my leg to releasing the ball, I can control that. I can't control if the umpire calls it a strike. I can't control if the guy hits a bomb. I can't control any of those things. So, trying to train that, the brain's like it's not, I guess technically not a muscle, but it's like anything else. The more you train it, the better you get at it. So I think there are ways to incorporate that into practice as well.
And that's where I was heading with Coach Gurney. That's what I meant was, when these young kids we've got to practice this in practice. because otherwise it's not going to transfer in the game. So now we're talking about figuring it out during these practice was when they do fail and they don't look really happy about it. How do they deal with it? Because that could happen in the game. So now they know where to go to it. As Coach Siler said, the breathing aspect, they can go to the breathing. So what are some other things that you guys might do that help your kids deal with that failure in practice so it transfers into a real life situation?
Well, we do a lot of visualization. So some of a lot of people teach visualization for only success, right? Visualize making a 3-point shot, visualize hitting a line drive to the gap, visualize throwing that 3-2 fastball on the inside corner and striking the guy out looking. But what I do with my guys is I talk about visualize making an error at shortstop and getting over it, and then the next ball that comes to you, you tearing a nasty double play. Or visualize being frozen on a 1-1 slider down and in, and then coming back and reacting and making an adjustment. And we actually did that before opening day last year. I took the team into a racquetball court at Lehman College, and we were in there for probably 45 minutes just doing visualization, not just team visualization, but I individualized it for so many of our different players. And it wasn't all success, Pete. There was a lot of failure built in so they could visualize, how am I going to respond to this? I also think players, hopefully it is a team, right? So they communicate with each other, they pick each other up. I mean, that's a real crucial aspect here. And again, I try to simulate our practices to have competitions that are games. So we might have a sack fly derby, or move them over, or get them in with a bunt. And there's a point system, and there's rewards or punishments for winning and losing teams. And believe it or not, that ratchets it up. Their ego's on the line. So they deal with failure in practice. It's not just, I'm going to take my 15 swings, my 3 bunts, and go home. We have our practices are built in with competitions.
Coach Siler, where do we start with this? Because on the show, I constantly say this, and I believe it. We've got to get young kids and coaches that are working with young kids to start this process of understanding how to deal with failure when you're 8, 9, 10 years old. I understand it doesn't have to be as complicated, but we need to start getting them to understand it, because one of the reasons, and people could use all the excuses they want about, videos and other things going on in society and all that. I get it. But the goal is long-term development, keeping them in the game as long as possible. Well, we know kids are quitting because of failure, whether people want to believe it or not. When they fail, there's no reason they're going to stay with this. So the younger we could grab them, but there's a delicate issue there. How do we start teaching young kids this same kind of process?
Well, I think, that's a really great point. Baseball's got to be fun or you're not going to play it. And if you fail all the time, if you go past the threshold of like, I fail all the time, this is no fun, I don't want to do this anymore, then you're doing a disservice to the athlete as a coach. Right?
But excuse me, but I'm sorry to interrupt, but on the flip, I'm going to take the flip side. On the flip side, we also have coaches or parents that put kids in always the position to succeed. That's not good either.
Well, it's like, then there's no growth. So you have to find, so if you imagine like, here's a circle and this is my comfort zone, right? And inside of there's no growth, there's no stress. And I hit, dingers all day because I'm getting flips and I'm set up to succeed. And I feel really great about myself. And then outside of that is a sort of an orange zone where I'm being challenged. I'm failing, but I'm also having success and I'm having growth. And that growth fuels more confidence. That growth fuels more success, because as you get older and you develop more skill and you get better at the game, you like it more. So you have to, stress isn't bad. Stress sometimes is good in helping to create an environment where there is growth. So that's the sort of the art and magic of coaching, is finding the orange zone. Because if you get out of that into the red zone, right, imagine there's another circle outside of that, which is red, where there's too much failure and there is not much fun and there is frustration and you don't enjoy what you're doing, you're going to lose them. So, I think you have to know the athlete, you have to, know the group of kids, and primarily your job is to create an environment that is fun and encourages them to grow and explore.
And no doubt about it. I mean, even big league guys do this, high school, college, they all love competition. So if we and Coach Gurney said it, if we don't include a lot of competition in a practice, it can be pretty boring a lot of times, just taking ground balls. But understanding also that there's got to be the fundamental aspect of it too, right?
Well, there's ways that then you can bring in, external constraints to it in order to try to help guide them in directions that you want them to go, right? So, instead of just saying we're going to do base running drills and we're going to start at home plate and you're going to run from first and take the turn and go to second, you can say, okay, here's a tee. You're going to hit the ball into the outfield, and I got somebody at second base and I've got my outfielders out there, and we're going to play a game called Double Trouble. And you're going to hit the ball off the tee into the outfield and you're hitting a double. You're running to second base no matter what. Here is a cone to which you must go past, right? And if you need to turn around, you can only do it if you go past that cone in the middle, like, let's call it 60 feet down the line between first and second. That's the only time at which you can turn around. Otherwise, you're going to second. You're sliding in. You're trying to get to second base. You get a point if you do it. If not, you don't. And you can also have cones down the first base line to kind of teach them what it's like to have a good turn, right? So you're doing lots of different skills. You're including competition, the outfielders. You can even position them in different places. So now they're getting work. Hey, reps 1 and 2 are going to be straight up. Reps 3 and 4 are going to be, you're in and you're going back on the ball. Reps 6 and 7, you're going to be playing on the warning track and coming in on everything.
And that's what you mean by constraints, right?
Yeah, like the cones is basically a constraint that just says, hey, you've got to go and run in this direction. You're creating an avenue. And then the next time through, you take those cones away and see if it's blended into what they normally or naturally do. And just doing those kinds, or even like in BP, you can instead of just doing the same old BP every time, you just say, okay, today, we've had a lot of really tough practices. What we're going to do today is I'm just going to set up a bunch of screens around the infield, and you have to hit it over that screen on the infield. We're teaching them about attack angles, and we're teaching them about hitting the ball in the air. We don't want pop-ups. We want to hit line drives at a certain angle, and we're teaching them to do that. And that's an external constraint that's just helping them figure out what they need to do with their bodies in order to have success in accomplishing that goal. And you can make it a competition. This team, line drives were a certain amount of points. So I think it's about finding the balance between challenging, but not overly so, right?
Great stuff. Coach Gurney, want to add?
Yeah, please. So, I could talk, drills and competitions till I'm blue in the face, but let me just share one. Darren mentioned double trouble, which is ostensibly not an exciting part of baseball, right? An outfielder fielding a ball and throwing it to second base, a base runner taking a turn. So another one, outfield cutoffs. When we do double cuts, I'll put a bucket in the right center field gap and a bucket in the left center field gap. And I'll blow a whistle or I'll smack my hands. And then the outfielders will race to see who can execute grab the ball, throw it into the shortstop, who then makes a double cut throw to the third baseman, who then throws it to the catcher. And then I've got another catcher set up on the right side of the field, Pete. So let's say the right fielder picks up the ball, throws it into the second baseman, who then throws it into the first. So it's a double cut competition. We'll time it and see who can set the record. Losing team might do push-ups or what have you, or maybe we give something positive away. So something that is a skill and activity that is normally a boring thing. Oh, we got to work on cutoffs, double cutoffs. We turn it into a fun, high energy competition. And I think fun, and Darren mentioned this, is really important at a baseball practice. Too much, you go 3 months straight, right? You might go 90, 100 days straight with 5-6 days off, whatever the number is. It can become a grind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think coaches often lose track of that. Oh, we're 12-6. We got to get to 15-7, or we're gonna blah blah blah. And it becomes too much of a job and a business. And you got to sometimes take a step back and say, I want to make this fun. How can I make a fun practice? So maybe the last 10 minutes of practice one day, we did this thing lefty baseball. So all the righties bat lefty and all the lefties bat righty. And it's fun about it, Pete. Not only do you see who's a real athlete, some kids realize, you know what, maybe I should be switch hitting.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun. So sometimes you got to just do out of the box stuff that might seem counterintuitive, like, oh, it's going to get silly, but you'd be surprised how well players will respond, right? I think it was Bob Lemon said, if you miss the point of fun in baseball, you miss the point of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. Sometimes you can move them position wise, and you never know. And a kid might like, especially when they're young, right? Move in a different position. All of a sudden they like that position. They've never played it before. And all of a sudden maybe you find out that they're pretty good at that position. So let me ask you guys this. I know people don't like to hear the negative aspect of it sometimes, because I know we want to be positive, positive, positive. I get it. But I'd like to know where we're going wrong also when we're running. What are some of the things we're doing as coaches that we're making some mistakes? I get the part that we're possibly not having fun at practice, but what's some of the things we're doing in practices that you see yourself, maybe you've changed because it wasn't as good as you thought it was, or maybe you've noticed in coaches working with young kids, they might be doing certain things that are not productive. I mean, we can learn from that part also.
Yeah, I'll field this one, Pete.
Okay.
And then Darren, I'm sure, will have a lot to add. Number one, I think you have to find the proper balance between repetitions, like taking 300 ground balls at shortstop in a 3-day period, versus also getting the fundamentals rehearsed, right? So maybe working on my glove work, my footwork, my throwing mechanics, my shuffle step, working on the fundamentals versus just sheer repetitions versus your X's and O's, trick plays, pickoffs, all that stuff, executing double plays. So I think you have to find the right balance there. And sometimes we get caught maybe pigeonholing in one of those directions too much. Like old school, just get all the reps you can. Maybe new school doing too much of the trickery and the fun, competition plays that you might see in a game, like a pickoff to second base and getting caught up doing too much of that versus actually working on fundamentals, which at all ages players still need to work on. Where are we going wrong? I do think too many kids are training for showcase baseball. So too many kids are trying to work on having a swing where I'm going to have an exit velocity of 94 miles an hour, not having a swing that adapts to a kid who might be throwing a changeup or a breaking pitch, and he's not just throwing fastballs down the middle. So too much of training, especially in facilities, but also at a lot of, travel levels, is designed to make the player look good for a college showcase setting, possibly a professional perfect game setting, even where someone might be getting scouted to be drafted. And I don't know how we change that, because all of the players and their parents ultimately want a college scholarship and the ultimate pie in the sky, getting signed and drafted. So how do you wind that back? I try to use the team concept. I try to talk about being able to react in a game to different variation. And a lot of current practice theory is all about having a lot of variation at practice and forcing players to be uncomfortable and have to react, Pete. So I'd like to hear from Darren, but that's some of my mindset on this.
Good stuff. Darren?
Yeah, those are all really great responses, Darren. I don't have a whole lot to add except for just to, sort of touch on some of the things you already touched upon and add a little bit of spin from my perspective. So, I feel like where we're failing as coaches, I think a lot of times we try to create robots instead of recognizing that robots are not robust and are not very good at reacting to the environment around them if the environment changes. So I think we try to pigeonhole things like mechanics as being absolute and repeatable when, motor, skill acquisition science tells us that it's not. I think sometimes what we find, this is what I'm finding in high school, is that I'm having to train how to compete more, because with the issue of showcase baseball and their summer teams, and I'm not demonizing the showcase world, and I'm not demonizing their summer ball programs, but these are my observations that I'm having to train more how the kids need to compete and also how they need to be better teammates. Because I think it's more on the individual, like, oh, we lost, so what? I went 2 for 3 and my coach was here, college coach that I talked to or emailed was here and saw me, so I don't care. Doesn't matter. I'll get the next one. Right. So those are things that I'm noticing. And I also think that we need to also not just train the skills of the athlete, but also incorporating the ideas about character, because ultimately what we're doing as coaches isn't just training them as baseball players, but we're trying to mentor them as young men. And I think sometimes that gets lost, and it's just about winning a baseball game and not about trying to train the young man to be a good teammate, which is eventually going to, like, we look at the organization, which is like the best of the best, the best, the best, which is the Navy SEALs, right? I mean, these guys are the best of the best of the best. And who makes it through SEAL training is the guy who is a high performer of high trust. They will even take a medium performer of high trust over a high performer of low trust. And it gets back to that character piece. So, if we're trying to use baseball as the sort of the avenue for helping mentor young men, it's got to include a piece about character. And we've got to model that as coaches. We've got to talk about it in terms of like what it's like to do the right thing and to serve other people. It's not just about you and your statistics. It's also about serving others around you, not just on your baseball team, but in your larger community. And I think sometimes that's unfortunately overlooked because we got to win a baseball game.
What about, and I love all that, what about decision making? There's a lot of decision making that happens in a ball game, and whether it's a third baseman, man on first and second, balls hit to my left, my right, at me. I mean, many situations. Now fielder gets a baseball. How do we structure that decision making where then it automatically transfers into a ball game? Because we can practice one decision on that situation, but there might be three possible decisions to make. How do we incorporate those into a practice? I know that could be a whole topic probably.
Pete, I think the ultimate arena where you see decision making and where sometimes players are robotic is base running. No other area do I see it more than base running, because base running takes experience and instincts.
Yep.
Certainly it applies to what you just said as a third baseman deciding, do I step on the bag and throw across the diamond, or do I go up the middle for a double play? But where do those instincts come from? That's why I think in practice you have to do a lot of situational work, a lot of simulated scrimmages. So every aspect of the game can be simulated to a live game situation. And then you have to stop and break it down and say, hey, what'd you do there? What could we have done differently? What might have been better? So, and that's where coaching is huge. And that's where if you have a staff, ideally of 3 or 4 coaches, one person can do the infielders, one can do the outfielders, one's doing the hitters, pitchers, obviously. It's very important to have diversification of a coaching staff. Now, if you're by yourself, well, then you're the CEO and you got to do it all. And that's fine too, if you're passionate and knowledgeable and really want to get after it. But it's really important to put them in those situations in practice and then break it down. One of my criticisms of some of the teams I observe when I go to these showcase travel tournaments is they play the game. There might have been 8 to 10 things that should be debriefed. And they just say, all right, guys, 5-2 loss, tough one. Let's go get it tomorrow. Hey, where's the post-game debrief and going over those 8 to 10 situations, right? And that's really important. And if you're a parent out there, try and get your son or daughter, if it's softball, with a program where they actually analyze and debrief scenarios from the game. Not just hitting mechanics, pitching mechanics, but decision-making like we're talking about.
Coach Siler, that goes into, I remember, I'm going back probably 15 years, I'm guessing, I can't remember. But, with USA Baseball, we had, regional trials in different states. And, with any tryouts, you'll see this. I mean, even when I went through tryouts, guys are taking ground balls and they used to tell them, we're going to hit you 2 at you, 2 to your left, 2 to your right, and then a slow roller. And, and I did it because that's what I was told to do. Right. So I did the same thing. Then I started thinking, wait a second, is that the type of player I want on my ball club? He may have pretty good skills, but I need a guy or gal that can make some decisions and they don't know where you're hitting the ball. It's like taking infield, outfield, right? We tell guys, well, we're going to hit the ball standard, not anymore. But a lot of guys will say, we'll hit the ball left fielder first, center fielder, right fielder, and all that. Well, again, we question why are we doing that, because there's no decision making there. They already know where you're going to hit the ball. First infield you hit the ball to is the third baseman, right? So we stopped all that. I guess that's where I'm getting with all this, and that's great stuff. What Coach Gurney was talking about. Add on, because I mean we don't want to build robots here.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. How many times as a coach have you had your fungo and you're going through and you'll maybe fake them out by tossing up and not do it, and you see them move in the direction that you were going to hit it because they're anticipating that you're going to hit it that way, so they want to get an edge. So you want to try, and that decision making has to happen in the moment, reacting to their environment, not a logical cognitive, I'm going to go this direction because that's what coach said. So you're trying to make it as realistic, as game-like as possible, and try to get them out of their rational cognitive mind and into the present moment. I'm reacting to what I see, observe, and am trying to accomplish. What is my end goal in the environment around me? So yeah, I would, to whatever extent you can, try to move away from those kinds of, hey, to the left, to the right, one in at you. I think as much as you can make it like a game, you should.
Yeah, another scenario you see a lot, and I realize you got to build up. Hopefully, a lot of coaches understand you're building up. You can't just throw things at kids right away. But another scenario is you watch them take ground balls. Sometimes they might have 2-3 people in a line, and they drop a ball and they get another one. Well, that's not what happens in a ball game. Sooner or later, you can't keep getting another one because you missed it. There's got to be some consequences for that. Understanding, okay, it's an error. I made it. Why did I make the mistake? What did I do? What could I do better the next time? But you can't get another ball all the time, because otherwise that's what they expect. It's kind of like the video game, right? They'll just shut it off and start it back up again because they weren't doing well. I mean,
Yeah.
Is that sense?
Yeah, and likewise, I think, sometimes you'll see that they'll make an error on the ground ball and they'll give up on it. It's like, well, actually, you should finish that play before you give up on it and want the next one. We were in Japan, and it was amazing. We were there 2 years, and I think I could count maybe on one hand the amount of errors during IO, which was phenomenal. But and that's probably including catch play as well and warm-ups. It was unbelievable. But the kid that made the error, I'm sitting there looking like, this is unbelievable. Look at this kid. He's shouting from shortstop position, waving his arms and his hat. Hey, coach, hit me another one. I want another one. I want another one. Give me another one. And he has to sort of prove himself to the coach that he deserves to get another ground ball because he didn't execute when it was time during IO. The coach will not hit him another ground ball unless he shows a certain level of enthusiasm and excitement. Now, maybe that's not an every kind of team thing, but we saw it a couple of times at a couple of different clubs where if there was a kid that made an error, he went to the back of the line. Well, first he finished the play. Then he went to the back of the line and he would verbally let his coach know, hey, I want another one. I want another one. I want another one. So.
And that's a great segue because, we're going to talk about the Caliendo Sports International trip to Japan this summer. Coach Gurney, you've got a lot of experience with Japanese players, being at your academy and everything. And, and I've got tremendous respect for the Japanese and what they do because I just love everything they do about it. I'm not saying they're perfect, but I just love what they do. Talk about a little bit about that situation that Coach Siler talked about. Do we recreate that situation for them so they can do it again? Or do we just let it go and let them come back around, take another ground ball? What's the proper way there?
It's interesting, Pete. Baseball is a game of tradition, and I think it takes a lot of courage for a coach or a coaching staff to say, we're doing it differently. And we're going to break from what you've done the last 12, 14, 16 years of playing baseball. And the fans, the parents, the players, they may raise their eyebrows like, what do you mean we're not doing a normal infield outfield? We're going to, just do situational ball, or we're going to actually start with the infielders and then go to the outfielders. And the outfielders, we're not going to tell them who we're hitting to. We're just going to randomly hit to different positions. I think it takes courage to break from a lot of those baseball traditions, But as I mentioned earlier, the more variability and the more kind of flexibility players have to operate within, I think the more success, because what is baseball? It's a game of adjustments, right? And the more we do that, I think both in pregame and at practice, the more they're going to perform successfully in a game, Pete.
Love it, love it. And before we get into Caliendo Sports Trip, because we're going to finish with that, I want to ask each one of you guys this question. As many years you've been coaching, from when you first started, what are some of the changes you made during practice in either your demeanor, how you organized it? Because you didn't start doing it the way you're doing it now. So what are some of the changes? Let's start with Coach Siler, since Coach Gurney just finished.
I think I'm a lot less verbal. I don't, in the beginning, I was very verbal, and I had a lot of, I guess what some people call old school coaches, who were loud and gruff and would yell if you made an error. And I just modeled that because it's what I knew, like, oh, what are you doing? Come on. Or let's say in the example of the third baseman that we were referencing earlier, whether to go to second base and turn two or to step on third and throw to first. I would stop practice, say, what are you doing? Follow the ball, go that way. So I'm a lot less gruff and a lot less vocal. I try not to be loud and yell across the field at people if they're not doing something they should be. Taking kids aside and trying to explain them more one-on-one kind of thing after the fact, say, hey, maybe you might want to think about doing this a different way. And I think also trying to move into more game-like situations. I did a lot of like chunking before, where I would, say, okay, we're going to do this one thing, and then we're going to do the next thing, and then we're going to do the next drill. And I'm trying to add a lot more, sort of connectivity with all of my stuff, and try to have things build off each other, as opposed to make it more game-like as possible, basically. And also even within, per your suggestion in our conversations, Pete, even the in-between innings things, we don't do just the first baseman rolling a ball to the second baseman and then the shortstop and the third baseman. Every inning we do something different. So we don't do the traditional lazy ground ball from the first baseman. I don't hit fungos at high school in between innings. I'm not allowed to do that, but I'd love to, but they don't let me. But we do different things. Outfielders throwing into the infielders, getting feeds, whether on the ground or in the air, going glove side or throw side, and throwing to their cuts, dry double plays, those kinds of things. Not throwing down to second base every inning from the catcher, throwing to first or throwing to third sometimes, those kinds of things. So just really trying to think outside of just what, questioning why I'm doing something. So trying to think about, why am I doing that? Is there a better way to do that? And then try to experiment with that a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I believe it might have been the snowball started when what you just talked about, thinking outside the box, let's call it, since it's outside the box show, right? But it's the Moneyball theory, right? I think that's the era that it kind of started, because it got everybody thinking, why are we doing it? You're right. Why are we doing it this way? So why don't we think that way more often? I know that I think we've all changed in that manner, and it's harder for somebody who's been in the game longer sometimes to make that change. But Coach Gurney, that's one of the areas you've changed as you've grown?
Less is more. That's an old expression in education. So if you try to do an hour's worth of content or skill work in a classroom in a 38 or 42-minute period, no good. You're better off trying to do 25 minutes worth in a 42-minute period. Same thing with baseball. I would try to cram in so many different activities in a 2.5 hour practice that I always left pissed off. And the players are like, why is coach so pissed? Because it took us so darn long to get our PFPs done that we didn't get to, bunt defenses, or we didn't get to sack fly defense, whatever it might be. So I just ended up being pissed off all the time. So now I try to do an hour and 20 minutes in a 2-hour practice. The other thing I do, Pete, and this does take time, speaking about time, I will stop practice and ask players questions in front of the whole team. Mm-hmm. Hey, what were you thinking there? Why did you do that? And I like them to have to speak publicly and let them describe their decision-making process, like we were talking about before, to their peers. And hopefully then it's a general learning process. And then in a game situation, they're also communicating, hey, here's what I did, here's why. And they're communicating with their middle infielders or their corner outfielders, whatever it might be, pitcher, catcher. So I think getting them to speak using a little Socratic method is very valuable.
You know what? I think that's a grand slam, and I'll tell you why. Because I think, again, I'm going to revert to the younger kids. We need to get them to do that at the young ages, so when they get to your guys' level, they're much better at communicating within their own, within themselves, with the coach, because it is tough. I mean, think about it. I remember being a young kid, and even in high school, if coach was to ask me, Pete, what'd you think in that situation in front of the whole group, I would freeze up. I may know the answer, but I would freeze up. So the more we could do that for young kids, the earlier they start that, I think the better it would be. I see a lot of school systems starting to do that at young levels, making kids speak more. I think that's so important. It's critical. I want to give a shout out to my mentor, Coach Birmingham, who passed away about 4 or 5 years ago. He used to always talk about this, and that is, he said, when he looked at positions, he always said, why are we practicing all these things at different positions? Why are we identifying? Because we only have so much practice with these kids. So it's all different levels, aren't they? You got youth, you got your in-house kids, you got your travel kids, then you got your high school, then you got college, pros. Everybody has different amounts of practices and levels of skills. And he used to say, identify each position, what you do the most. An example, right? What would a catcher do the most? Well, it's pretty simple. He blocks, he throws, and he blocks, he throws, and he catches. So why aren't we focusing really hard on those 3 things instead of worrying about 12 things that the catcher might do? Because we don't have enough time to do that. Now, you may put those in there. So I guess, what I'm getting at is, being a coach, you have to identify their skills, right? I mean, we have to identify the level, what we're going to put into the practices. And I think you guys did a great job of putting all this in. Let me throw 2 scenarios at you before we get into the final thing. I lied about the final thing, as I always do, because something else comes up. Coach Siler, here's a scenario. You're in your practice. You got a kind of a scrimmage game going on, or a simulated game. And Coach Gurney mentioned base running. Guy gets picked off, right? Whatever situation may be. How do you deal with that situation when he just got picked off? What's kind of the protocol you follow to work with that player on that pickoff? Why he got picked off? I mean, like you said, some coaches, they get mad right away, or could get mad in that situation. How do you deal with it?
Well, in practice, usually I'm walking around the field at different positions or different spots. So I'd probably walk over to that player and take them aside off to the side and just have a conversation. Hey, what were you thinking about? What were you looking at? Because we talk quite a bit about, whether it's a classroom session like we're doing in our Chalk Talks now, or even in base running sort of practice when we're doing, like, say, double trouble or some other base running incorporated drill. We're telling them certain things that we want them to look for, right? Because just a quick example is a little departure from the path, just so I can give you the full answer. I've been known to go on for a while, as you know, but
well, yeah, that always worries me when you say, I really don't have anything to add, but I add a little bit on Coach. I know that, we've known you, so we've been around you a long time. So, but this is great stuff. Keep it going, man.
But we teach them things that we want them to look for, and then it's up to them to act on it. So we stole in 2018, 69 bases in 26 games. And in 2019, we stole 64 bases. In 26 games, something like that. We called a steal maybe once or twice. So we train in practice things for them to look for. And then the only time I will ever get mad at them for getting picked off or getting thrown out is if I give them the red light. Otherwise, that's just an opportunity for them to learn something, right? So, if we're in the practice and we're in a scrimmage and that young man gets picked off, I walk over and I'll take them aside and say, hey, so what we're looking for, the things that we're trying to take advantage of, right? The scoreboard and the pitcher are the things that are going to kind of tell us what our situation is. And we've got the breakdown of situations. So what were you thinking? What was going through your mind? And it could be, depending on their answer, it could be just something as simple as, oh, hey, I spaced out. Or, I was thinking about something instead of doing something. Sorry, coach, I'll get it next time. maybe that he was looking at the wrong thing or misunderstood the situation. And so that's an opportunity for us to say, hey, well, actually, this is really what you should have been looking at, instead of what you were thinking about. So it's an opportunity for us to have a conversation and allow that young man to grow, and to know what to look for next time in that same situation.
Have you ever had a situation where the player gave you an answer and then you said to yourself, you said, that's not a bad idea. I mean, he actually had a good intention, and maybe you learned something from it. I know I've had that with coaches, in coaching clinics, where they asked you a question and in other words, you just explained what they should do, and then they gave you a different situation, and you thought, well, maybe that could have been a good situation.
Well, I mean, I think if you're not learning from your players, then you should probably quit. I mean, if you're not learning from things that they tell you and the way that they look at the game,
yeah,
I think you've stalled in your growth as a human being and as a coach.
Good point.
So there's a lot of times that I hear something that my player says or an idea that they come up with, and I say, yeah, that's a really good idea. I better consider that here.
Right.
So yeah, my guys, they know that I encourage them to come and talk to me about stuff. Hey, what's working for you? What's not? What can we do? Like Coach even mentioned, Gurney, you mentioned letting the players design practices or be the first base coach and third base coach, and let them call plays and do stuff and let them explore. I mean, that's what it's all about. So yeah, it happens a lot, Pete.
Yep. Coach Gurney, add on.
Yeah, so I always start with fundamentals. So if a kid gets picked off in your scenario, I'll say, how was your primary lead? Did you do everything that you were supposed to? Was it your secondary lead? Let's go through the footwork of that. Things that we've taught physically.
Mm-hmm.
And after we do that, then we'll talk about the mental side. But I want to make sure the fundamentals were clean before we just say, oh, I froze, or I misread his leg swing, or whatever it might have been, or his head movement threw me off. So I always want to come back to something that is concrete, and that is fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll build from there, Pete.
Love it. Love it. Great way to close that part of it. But also there's a segue here because we're going to talk about the Caliendo Sports International trip to Japan. And one of the things Coach Gurney was talking about, kids coaching for, the bases, as you know, and Koshian in Japan, we mentioned on the show before, we're talking about thousands, 20, 40,000 fans a game, 4 games a day, high school championships. Well, guess who's coaching the bases? This isn't practice time, folks. This is the real deal. Single elimination, 46 teams, whatever it is, national television. Well, you don't have any coaches coaching the bases. The players are coaching the bases, which means they've been put in that situation before. And I love that situation. I think, we talk about practice organization and figuring out how kids are going to do things. I mean, keeping them busy, especially the young kids, the little kids. I mean, one way to keep them learning is to put them on the bases in practice, right? Let them be the coaches. I mean, you guys brought up a great point there. So let's segue into the Japan trip. Really hard for me to articulate. I've been doing this a long time. But, I know the trips are expensive. We lay that out. We're flat out honest about it. They're expensive, but there's a lot of value behind the trips. If one, you can afford it, or two, if you can raise the money to be able to do it. I always tell parents, and I'll preface this, do not go in debt, put it on credit cards if you don't have the ability to pay it off soon, because that's just not good common sense, business sense, or family sense, because you save that money for something else that's more important in your life. But if you have the time, do the trip. Why? Because there's so many values behind a trip like this, right? And that's what I want to get into. So maybe start with Coach Siler. Some of the values you believe, other than, yes, the baseball is going to be competitive, the cultural aspect we get, because they're going to see a new country. That's a given, right? You're going to see new things. You're going to learn something all the time. But go deeper with it if you can.
Sure. Well, I think we talked earlier about getting outside of your comfort zone. If you ask a fish what water is, he doesn't know how to respond because he's in it every day and doesn't know anything other than that. If you are only in one town or one state or one little bubble that you live in and exist in, there is no growth because you don't know what's outside of that, right? So the experiences that you go through in taking a trip like this, the obviously the baseball and the witnessing of some cultural things, but the culinary experience, new tastes, new sights, new smells, new environment, all of those things are going to be, like we talked about, that comfort zone, and outside of that is that growth zone. You're experiencing a tremendous amount of growth as a human being by being in those places. And what an incredible memory that you're making, you know, if you're fortunate enough to be able to go with your family. As a group, to be able to have that as a cherished memory that you shared, experience that you had together, and to be able to reminisce and tell stories, and to look back on everything that you went through. There is a tremendous amount of growth that happens from being on these cultural trips. As a coach, I've learned a ton. As a person, I've learned a ton. You know, I'm always trying to learn bits and pieces of new languages, which is also, cognitively, that's good for you as well. But the relationships that you also get to make with other people from all over your country, the people that you get to play against and with, because sometimes we'll mix teams, and there's be a mixed team of Japanese and Americans, and Gurney and I'll go against each other with mixed teams, and you'll see them communicating, the players communicating with each other with the language of baseball. They're doing these hand signals and trying to find common ground. That is, an incredible experience for these young men on their journey with communication, collaboration, compassion, understanding, experience, all of it. I mean, and Japan is just an amazing country, and a lot of their values, like teamwork and the community view. I mean, they're very community oriented. You see how they do things, can give you perspective and insights that you may not have had.
Hey, Coach Gurney, we picked the right guy to say go deep, huh? I thought that was. I mean, why did I started with Coach Siler because I knew he was going to go really deep into this, but add on, because I know you got a lot to say about the participant, being a participant in a lot of these trips.
Well, let me just say this. I was impressed. I met Darren in Tokyo, and I had already been coaching at a Japanese school at the time, a Japanese boarding school, for 6-7 years. And his Japanese was better than mine, Pete, and I was furious. So he's a cultured man, and he does appreciate those fine aspects of your trips. Here's the thing, though. The players on your trips, they all want to play college baseball. It's rare that you get someone on a Caliendo Sports Trip who's like, oh, I just want to play high school ball at most. No, they want to play college baseball. And this trip to Japan and all of your trips really prepare them for college baseball, the long bus rides, the expectations of the coaches. I'm a college coach, so I talk to them about what they have in front of them if college baseball is going to be on their agenda. The getting to the bus on time. They get to their bus on time at their local school. The bus is sitting outside their gym. They didn't sleep in a hotel room. They didn't have to, rush, shower after breakfast, get ready, bring all their stuff to the bus. This is a whole new deal out of their comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And I think your trips prepare them for that college and even minor league baseball experience, the long bus rides, the intensity of coaches, the long, days on a field in some cases. Obviously, we mix in those wonderful sightseeing and cultural experiences, but I think ultimately it is going to prepare them for college baseball, which is what they want. And ironically, the few people who say, I want to save my money and not go on an international trip because I want to focus on putting it towards a showcase or putting it towards a certain training facility, they're missing out, because this actually will prepare them for the college baseball world in a much different way that definitely takes them out of their comfort zone, which is really important. It builds independence, frankly, Pete.
Yeah, and you've said the word, both you guys, outside your comfort zone, and we've all experienced that, so we know what the trip can do for a young person, and not only a young person but parents, because I've had parents come back, that kind of opened up a whole new world to them. But I've also had individual kids that have traveled, because sometimes not all kids can travel with their parents. And the parent, the kid goes home and he's like a different kid. Well, that's because he's been in a different environment and he's had to do things on his own. And as you know, we don't allow, parents to pack the kids' bags or carry their bags or do certain things that maybe they're doing for their sons and daughters back home. Hopefully they're not doing that. But if I'm playing devil's advocate, I'd say I'm a parent, I want to go on this trip. But we know we can't get together early to practice because it's now you're adding a whole new cost to it. But what's the benefit of now? Because I see a benefit out of this where now you really don't get a chance to practice. Some trips we may get a chance to go in that morning, the first morning, maybe get a slight practice in. Other than that, these kids don't know each other, most of them, maybe a couple do. Coach Siler, what's the benefit of that? Because some parents might say, well, we should be training if we're going to compete.
Yeah, well, you're allowing them to compete, and you're allowing them to understand something more fundamental about not only the game but themselves and how they deal with adversity and how they deal with other people on the team. Adjusting to in the moment decision making thing that we were talking about. Mm-hmm. They're having to get out, like you said, to get outside their comfort zone, interact with people they've never met before, have a common goal with those people, and work to collaborate with them to accomplish that goal as a unit. That's teamwork. That being coachable, being a good teammate, having good energy and intensity. Those are all really important skills, not just in baseball but in life. And you're thrown into the crucible, and what comes out is a more resilient person that has those experiences and has learned from them.
Yeah, they got no choice, Coach Gurney. They gotta communicate. I mean, the game starts. The coaches can't be there telling them what to do every 2 seconds because the game's rolling, and now you got a man on first, and you got to decide. You can't just look at each other. You got to talk, right? So you got to be able to communicate with players you don't know.
Yeah, sticking with my college baseball theme, when they get to college, it's August 25th, and they're going to the baseball field for the first time. They really don't know many people, if any, on the team. And what are they going to do? They're not going to have a 3-hour practice. They're going to play a game because there's tryouts going on. Those first 2 weeks of college baseball is evaluation and game situations. They're playing games. They're not getting reps at shortstop and center field. At most, there'll be a quick infield, outfield, and then they're playing 9-15 innings on a Saturday and same thing on a Sunday. So why not have that experience on one of your trips, Pete, where we don't really know each other and we're thrust into the frying pan in the game situation?
The other aspect, Coach Siler, is what are your guys' responsibilities as coaches during these games? Because this could be misinterpreted sometimes. What are you doing mostly when it comes to the ball game themselves as coaches?
Letting the kids play, but mentoring them throughout the process. So making sure that they're safe, right? We're monitoring their pitch limits and making sure that they have the opportunity to play multiple positions, because we like to encourage people to play in more than just one place. We're not going to have the same catcher every game. So we're doing things behind the scenes, technically, but we're also talking to them about game situations, about things that they did really well. We're also taking notes and evaluating them, because every player gets a full evaluation from us on things that we notice that they did really well, things that they can continue to work on, suggestions about their continued development. And we're here to be, number one, relationships, because hopefully we've made a connection with those families that are there, and they can use us as resources for letters of recommendation or helping them in finding a team if they're locally in our area, or just being an advocate for them for the long term as well. So making those relationships and helping guide them through what is ostensibly a pretty unnerving situation for a young man to be thrust into. Don't know anybody, you're playing a game against people in a foreign country. Everything looks different, sounds different. Wow, I've got somebody here that I can trust and rely on to help teach me the game, pick me up if I make a mistake, and give me a high five if I do something well.
And Coach Gurney, you're going to add on in it, but let me just add, what's interesting is during this time, you're as coaches, you're evaluating, you can see these kids, in my opinion, in uncomfortable situations, under pressure, pressure's there no matter what, because, and they're uncomfortable, and you're finding out how they deal with it, because back home they might be set up in a comfortable situation. Here they're dealing with a different situation. Now you can realize, interesting, he's not dealing with it as well, but it's also a learning experience for him.
Yeah, Pete, I would mention something that we do as coaches. We are out in the field with them when they're doing their active warm-up. We are out in the field with them when they're doing their warm-ups. And back to your practice organization discussion from, it seems like 6 hours ago, that we started with here. One of my pet peeves about coaches is they sit in the dugout, spit sunflower seeds, and write up lineup cards and talk to the other coaches when their players are setting the tone for the next 3 hours of their performance and their success, when they should be out there with them going over proper throwing routines and proper warm-up routines. And we're out there doing that. And I think it's important that players are taught the proper mindset and fundamentals before they actually get on the field. And that's in that warm-up situation. I think that's very important. And then the other thing is I try to foster that, let's just say, communication and unity, because these kids are from all over the country. They haven't played with each other. And I try to set up that bond. And lastly, I've been fortunate, Pete. I've stayed in touch with a bunch of the players that I've met on your trips, and they've said such nice things to me, written so many nice emails. And I've continued to do some video analysis and give them advice about the college process, or even just communicating with a high school coach who they might, have a little friction with. So for me, it's a multi-pronged thing that, I would stress.
And folks, so during the trip, the coaches are always talking to the parents, the players as a group, whether it be after practice, on the bus. So there's always conversations going on, asking questions. I know parents have a lot of questions. So I believe, it's a great educational trip at the same time, not just for the players, but for the parents that go. Let's close it off with this, and then you guys could add anything you like. The other aspect I was thinking about, and Coach Gurney mentioned that it's a long day. So the opportunity to understand how important it is when you're going to compete at that level, because we're talking about Japan's a pretty good level. There's some great players in Japan. It's a lot of fun going there. You're going to see things you've never seen before in a lot of ways. But at the same time, sleep is important, drinking plenty of water, all the things we talk about. I mean, sleeping is a big issue right now, especially with the time change and all that. So now we're delving into that aspect of it, because now kids and parents start to understand how important sleep is for productivity of your games.
Yep. Yeah. Rest, recovery, and sleep and nutrition are highlights. It's really important that they're doing those things and taking care of their bodies, taking care of their recovery, taking care of getting the right amount of sleep. Super important on this trip, but in life in general. So it reinforces that for them. Coach Gurn, what do you got?
I would just say they learn how to be away from home, where they have all their creature comforts, which is what freshman year of college is going to be like, right? Or ideally, first year of minor league baseball is going to be like.
Yeah.
And the more we put them in that environment, the better they're going to be. And they're going to learn from the Japanese too. I mean, that's, for me, one of the real highlights. They learn how the Japanese play pepper, or do their PFPs, or do their pre-game hitting rituals. And I think all of that is so valuable to learn from another culture. It's really the ultimate, right? We get so set up in doing things the way we've been doing them in our little community for the last 8 years, and this or that guy who played in this pro team is giving me my lessons, or is my high school coach, or is my travel coach. And now all of a sudden we're exposed to a whole new world. And it's really powerful, Pete.
And that's a great point. I mean, you just by watching the Japanese or training with them, practicing with them, playing catch with them. Coach Siler mentioned, he doesn't see many balls dropped. I remember kids coming back to the hotel saying, I can't believe how well they play catch. I mean, and these are pretty good players that we're talking about, and they're looking at the Japanese saying it's amazing how well they play catch. Well, there's no secret. They do it a lot, right? They spend more time. They practice on their own. There's other things that they do. So I think that's a great way to close it off. If there's any last comments, and if not, we'll close it off. Any last comments on the trip?
I would say, Pete, your guys do such a wonderful job of having a well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
So the Dominican Republic, where you might think, okay, they're a little more relaxed, mañana, everything was on time. Italy, everything was on time. And Japan, forget about it. If the bus is coming at 7:30 to get us to a game at 9 a.m., it's going to be there at 7:25.
Yeah.
But and that's a credit to your staff in those countries, Pete,
Yeah.
who make sure everything runs smoothly. The diplomacy, I'll just use that word, is remarkable. And that really struck me on my first and every trip I've been on with your organization.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about the most organized people in the world, there's no doubt that's the Japanese, in my opinion. They do a great job. I'm sure there's others that do very well. Coach Siler, anything? If not, I'll close it off.
Well, I would encourage, if you're even remotely interested, to explore the option and opportunity to go on one of these trips. It's transformative. You know, if you reach out to other people that have been on it, I know, Coach Caliendo can put you in touch with people to give you their feedback, but it is a transformative experience. And, Coach Gurney is absolutely right. Your folks abroad do a phenomenal job. They really do. So certainly one of the best things that's ever happened to me is to come on to be one of the coaches to go on these trips. I learn a ton as well, and get to meet all these wonderful people from all over the world. So it's really a blessing. So thank you, Pete.
All right, a shout out to all our staff all over the world. Awesome job. You heard it from the guys that have come to all these countries. I got to tell you the other thing, folks. Don't forget, if you're going on a Japan trip, we're going to put everything on the show notes, but just email us at caliendo19@gmail.com. If you're interested, if you're a coach that wants to recommend players, the ages are going to be 14 to 15 in that area. We will take maybe some 13-year-olds depending on the level of that player, if they're competitive enough, but that's basically the age group. If you have any questions, email us. And every day we're doing something. So we're going to go to, whether it's a, major league game, to watch the major league players play. We could be going to a practice. We could be practicing with a Japanese team, but we're always playing a game every day. And as Coach Siler said, we love to mix the guys up certain times that, because of the fact that our kids have pitched a lot during the summer, we don't want to overpitch them. So we might mix them with the Japanese players, and that's a great learning experience. So again, we'll put everything on the show notes, guys. I can't thank you enough. Yeah. Coach Gurney, blame Coach Siler for the hour-and-a-half show. I just sat back and listened. I thought it was great. I think it's going to be a fantastic show when I go back and listen to it again. But I'll start with you, Coach Siler, man. Thanks for, you get 3 words, and that's it after I thank you for this. No, you get whatever you want to say. Thanks for being on the show as always, man. You're a great person.
Thank you, Pete. I really appreciate everything. Thanks for the opportunity to come on the show again. And arigato.
Arigato. Domo arigato gozaimasu. And Coach Gurney, thank you, man.
Yeah, one of the highlights of my life, and I'm in my 50s now, has been thanks to you to be able to travel around the world with baseball, my ultimate love, and then to meet and develop such great friendship with someone like Coach Siler. So it's been an amazing experience for me later in my life than I would have ever expected, baseball bringing me to these wonderful treasures and opportunities.
Absolutely.
So konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa. There you go. And folks, I'm going to close it off by saying that, I've been doing this, I don't know, 30 some years. And every time we've got a trip and I get a chance to go on it, I'm excited like the first time I ever did it. I mean, so that if that doesn't give you an example, because, I could sit back and say, and send somebody else, one of our staff members, say, go ahead and go to Japan. But every opportunity I get, I try to go on a trip, because not only is it fun, but I'm always learning something myself, whether it be from the coaches, whether it be from the other teams, whoever it is that you're dealing with. So folks, I want to thank Coach Siler, Coach Gurney. Thank you to Brian Crock, our producer with the Lineup Media Group. Thanks to everybody in the U.S. staying up this late, listening to us on Facebook. Remember, the show's going to be on the podcast, Baseball Outside the Box. Go there for the audio. If you want to watch it live on YouTube, go to YouTube at Peter Caliendo. Hey, stay safe, stay healthy. God bless you all, and we'll see you on the next show.